Hello and welcome to this Private Housing 2016 webinar. We will be covering private renting. If you want to find out information about King's accommodation, please contact the King's Residences team. My name is Aagie Sleightholm.
And my name is Steve Hawton. We work for the Student Advice Service here at King's College London, and we give advice on practical help and information on contract checks, housing advice. We run various events, housing events as well, including flatmate finder events. When you're thinking where you want to live in London, there are various things that you should take into consideration, principally budget, location, flatmates, and the various types of accommodation that may be available to you. Accommodation is expensive in London. It will likely be your largest single expense, particularly if you want to be in central London or Zone 1. The zone system of transport is one way of giving you a very rough estimate of housing costs, with the higher zones likely to be cheaper, but with increased travel costs as a result. However, with a bit of planning and research, you will be able to find an area that meets your budget. London being a large international city, there are no student-specific areas, and there is one general housing market with young and old professionals also often sharing houses.
Types of accommodation in London will include flats and houses, private halls, living with a resident landlord, or odds and ends. Flats and houses in London tend to be terraced, Victorian or Edwardian, which are often converted into flats. Private halls are probably the most expensive option, but bills will be included and they're often in central locations. When you're living with a resident landlord, you will be living as a lodger in their home. This can be a flexible option in terms of the terms of the contract. It can be also a cheaper option, but you would have often less legal rights than if you were a tenant. You would often have house rules because you're sharing in somebody else's home, and you will likely be on what's known as a license agreement rather than a tenancy. Another option would be property guardianship, which is when you are looking after disused public or private building that may not have been intended as a residence. This option is not as cheap as it used to be and can be badly regulated. You may also have limited access to utilities and little protection against eviction. Artist studios and workspaces would also be another option. These again are not licensed for habitation. There used to be a culture of squatting in London, which is when you live in an abandoned property. Squatting is now actually illegal in residential property.
Most students would live in shared housing with other students, and this is the preferred option for most, principally because it's the most cost effective. Most students will live in a purely student household, but it's not uncommon for students to live in a mixed household of students and professionals in London either. One of the issues with shared housing is that there's likely be what's known as joint liability with both for the contract and for renting bills, and what this means is that effectively you're all equally liable for the cost of the contract. So it's very, very important that you choose your flatmates carefully. Larger properties may require what is known as an HMO license, which is a house in multiple occupation.
Properties are advertised through letting agents and online. We don't endorse any specific websites, but common ones include spareroom.com, Gumtree. Do be careful of scams on all websites. The University of London Housing Services also have a database of landlords and letting agents that have signed up to their code of good practice. You can access the database through their website. You need a King's ID number to be able to register to use the full database.
If you're looking for housing in London, you'll almost certainly come into contact with letting agents. These are people who work for the landlord. This is important to remember, that they are not working for you, they are working on behalf of the landlord and will act in the landlord's interests. They advertise properties, they sign up tenants, they earn commission, and they will charge fees as well. And those fees can include things like admin and credit reference checks. There are generally two different types: let only or managing agent. Let only, the letting agent will essentially find a tenant for the landlord, and after that, management of the property will be the landlord's direct responsibility. But there are also managing agents as well, and they will manage the property directly on behalf of the landlord. There are also agencies popping up in London that do not work for landlords essentially, but will offer to try and help you find accommodation for a certain fee. In our experience, these aren't worth it. When a letting agent is working for the landlord, they can't charge you. It is illegal to charge you a fee for joining. There are probably thousands of letting agents in London, some quite big companies, and some may simply be individuals working as letting agents. So how do you find one that you should trust? It's now a legal requirement for letting agents to be a member of one of three redress schemes that are listed on the left-hand side of the slide here. In addition to that, they should be members of various professional bodies. This is voluntary, but they can provide additional redress through their professional bodies as well. There is also a scheme called Safe Agent, which provides some insurance against the agent going out of business.
Be wary of scams, especially through Gumtree. Don't pay anything before viewing a property, and don't use money transfer services. If something looks too good to be true, then it generally is. If you're unsure of anything, then you're welcome to contact us.
It's important to inspect a property before moving in, and some of the things that you may want to look at is the general repair and condition of the property. We would recommend looking at the windows and doors. Is it secure? Are the windows double glazed? You might want to look at, in particular, for damp and mould, and in some cases water damage. Look for black mould in the bathroom. Is the property well ventilated? Is there adequate heating? Is there central heating? With regards to size and space, does it meet your needs? Is there plenty of natural light? Is the property furnished or unfurnished? In London, most properties will be furnished, but check what is included. In particular, does it have a desk? With regards to the local area, check access to shops, green space, transport links. London generally is a very safe city. Areas tend to have a wide socio-economic range of people as well, but do check the local area. Check it at night if you can. Would you feel comfortable walking home late at night when less people are about, for example?
Landlords have certain responsibilities in terms of health and safety. So, for example, a gas safety certificate is a legal requirement, and this should be renewed every 12 months. A working fire alarm should be installed on each floor of a property. The landlord must ensure at the beginning of a tenancy that the alarm is in working condition, and during the tenancy this would be the responsibility of the tenant. Landlords must also get electrical inspection reports every 5 years if there is more than one tenant living in the property. Some properties will also require additional safety measures and will require an HMO licence from the local authority. Come and check with us if you're unsure.
When you've found a property you like, you may be asked for a holding deposit. Holding deposit is intended to hold the property while contracts and referencing are carried out. Check the terms of the holding deposit and make sure you get a receipt or written agreement. The deposit should not be kept if agent or the landlord arbitrarily decide not to offer the tenancy. You may be also asked for a guarantor with regards to the tenancy agreement. This is someone usually UK based who will also take on liability for the rent. If you're on a joint tenancy, that could be for the other people who are living there as also. So it's important, if possible, to arrange an agreement that guarantor's liability is limited purely to your rent. If you're not able to access a guarantor, UK-based guarantor, unfortunately it is common in London to ask for rent in advance, a significant amount of rent in advance, sometimes 6 months, and in some cases 12 months rent in advance as well. It is possible to negotiate on this point with the landlord or the agent. If you're going to try and negotiate with your landlord with regards to rent in advance, it's a good idea to have evidence of how you're funding yourself, what funds are available to you, and to be able to provide that. The UK government has recently introduced some controversial legislation which requires landlords and agents to carry out a check of your immigration status, and this is known as right to rent. Essentially, they will have to review original copies of documents such as passports, but other things may be acceptable, such as an EEA identity card or your biometric residence permit as well. Look out for extra fees. Landlords can charge for these checks, but they must make any fees clear and upfront. Very importantly, do not send any original documents in the post to your landlord or agent. These checks should be carried out in person, and take the documents away with you.
Most tenancies are assured short-hold tenancies, or otherwise known as ASTs for short. These will usually be for a period of 6 or 12 months fixed term. There may well be a break clause in the contract, which would usually be at 6 months, but otherwise you cannot generally break a contract before the end of the fixed term. Always read the contract. It should be written in plain and understandable English. You can also always come and speak to us. We can contract check for you. Seek advice if you're unsure.
You'll almost certainly be asked to pay a deposit with regards to the tenancy. These are usually 4 to 6 weeks worth of rent, and they're intended to secure against damage by the tenant. The money must be secured with a government-backed deposit protection scheme, and these are the tenancy deposit scheme, the deposit protection service, or mydeposits.co.uk. There are potentially civil penalties in place if your landlord does not meet various obligations with regard to protecting your deposit, including protecting it within 30 days. They should also give you what's known as the prescribed information, which is additional information relating to the protection of the deposit as well. This will be a separate document in addition to the tenancy agreement.
When you move into a property, always read the meters straight away, so the gas and the electricity meters. You'll need to set up new accounts for utilities and TV licensing and potentially broadband as well. You, as a full-time student, you would be exempt from council tax, but if you are living in a mixed house with non-student flatmates, they may expect a contribution. It is important to carry out an inventory when moving in, which is a written record of items in the property and also the condition of the property itself. The inventory can be carried out by a third party, and you may be required to pay for this. As part of the inventory, it's useful to also take additional photos. Report any problems or defects with the property straight away and in writing. In addition to this, if there are any other arrangements or agreements that you make with the landlord or agency that are not in the tenancy agreement, get this into writing as well.
Once you're living in the property, you'll have various duties as a tenant to carry out as well. These include reporting repairs and defects as soon as possible. This should be done in writing, keeping the place clean and tidy generally to avoid further problems, avoid causing condensation and mould, such as through drying clothes within the house. Obviously, don't cause any damage to the property, because the cost of that would be taken out of your deposit. You have a responsibility to change light bulbs and batteries, and also once you're in the property, it's your responsibility to test the smoke alarms. The landlord's duties include carrying out repairs within a reasonable time of being notified. They may carry out just general inspections of the property, but they should give you forewarning of at least 24 hours. And if it's not reasonable, then you can refuse and rearrange for that inspection. They should carry out gas safety checks every 12 months. There may be house and multiple occupation licensing, that is applicable if it's a particularly large property, and they also have a duty to keep the property hazard free. It's also worth checking the tenancy for any additional agreements and asking whether they're fair and reasonable. As the tenant, the property is your home, and you have the legal right to peaceful and quiet enjoyment of the property as your home.
Four of the main problems that we see include condensation, mould and damp issues, students who want to leave their tenancy early, pests and infestations in properties, and also disputes with deposits at the end of the tenancy. Each deposit scheme that we mentioned earlier gives access to a dispute resolution service in case there is a disagreement over deductions. The course of action for each of these issues can depend on the contract, so always seek advice.
Where can you get this advice? Well, you can get it from us, the Student Advice Service here at King's College London, but you also have access to University of London Housing Services as well. There is a national charity in the UK called Shelter. Their website is very good in terms of general information about your rights as a tenant. And there is also what's known as the Citizens Advice Bureau here in the UK. Their website is pretty good as well, but they do have offices located in cities across the UK who can give advice on one-to-one basis as well. In the first instance, though, I would always encourage you to come in and visit us and access the Student Advice Service here at the college.
Okay, that takes us to the end of the webinar. If you have any further questions, of course, please do get in touch. Here are our contact details.